Joe Burrow is sidelined for 3 months due to another serious injury thanks to his very shitty offensive line. Hi everyone, welcome back to another video of Spectator Sports, where we cover sports from a spectator's point of view. I'm your host Sebastian Fonseca, and in this video we'll be breaking down how the Bengals have been failing their superstar quarterback ever since they drafted him in 2020. But before we get into the content, please do us a massive favor as we are on the grind to 400 subscribers by the end of 2025. So if you can please do us a massive favor by dropping a like and subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already. And if you want to get more clips from Spectator Sports, we got that for you here on YouTube in our various playlists, as well as on TikTok. And if you want to enjoy Spectator Sports from an audio-only experience, we got that for you on Spotify. I'll link everything in the description, and let's get into the video. It's only 2 weeks into the 2025 NFL season, but we have some major news with the injury to Joe Burrow. In a Week 2 matchup against the Jacksonville Jaguars, protection broke down and Joe Burrow was sacked by Eric Armstead, and his foot just simply got caught in the turf and he sustained a grade 3 turf toe injury where ligaments in his toe were torn, and that means that he's going to need surgery to repair the damage. Now, the recovery time for this type of severe injury is 3 months, and that it's going to take us to mid-December at this point, as the Bengals are hoping and praying that Jake Browning can hold down the fort while Joe recovers in time for maybe a late playoff push in mid-December, if he is even able to do so. The chances of that even happening might be unlikely at this point. We just don't know how Joe's going to respond from the treatment, but obviously wish Joe the very best. Unfortunately, injuries have been part of Joe Burrow's story since being drafted by the Cincinnati Bengals in 2020. His rookie year was cut short after his knee was torn up with a torn PCL, a torn MCL, a torn ACL, and even his meniscus. You fast forward to 2023, he tears a ligament in his wrist on his throwing hand, and that means he's done for the year. And now this year, I mean, he's probably slated to miss at least 10 games, if not more, due to this injury. And it's really unfortunate. I mean, I love seeing Joe Burrow play. I think he's a really, really extraordinary quarterback. Once again, the problems arise with the offensive line, and there's a long history of poor protection leading to significant injuries for the Bengals signal caller. With just 2 games into the season, he's already sustained nearly 30 more sacks than Andrew Luck. Luck, as many NFL fans may know, is a cautionary tale for young, talented quarterbacks whose career was derailed due to injuries, forcing him into an early retirement before he turned 30 years old. And with this latest injury to Joe Burrow, I fear that the Bengals might be putting Joe into a similar trajectory as Andrew Luck with the Indianapolis Colts. You can blame the Bengals front office, as they've been notoriously poor at acquiring even average offensive line talent to protect their franchise quarterback. Since entering the league in 2020, the Bengals' pass block win rate never finished higher than 27th in the league, meaning that Burrow hasn't played behind an offensive line that didn't rank higher than the bottom quartile in his career. This is disgraceful work by the Bengals front office, and we understand that there's been a long documented history of Mike Brown and his family being notoriously cheap and stingy. We know that the Bengals have the smallest scouting room in the entire NFL. They just don't really use assets to try to find new talent, whether it's in the draft or free agency. They just recently became one of the few cold weather teams to have an indoor practice facility. They are stingy even in that capacity. With their stinginess, they've also had really bad contract disputes with players in the past. You think about Carson Palmer, who was really fed up with the management that he threatened retirement and ended up getting his way as he forced a trade to the Oakland Raiders at the tail end of his career. You can just see how all these kind of accumulate to being kind of one of the most mismanaged franchises in NFL history. And the Bengals are one of the few teams that don't even have an official GM, as Duke Tobin is the director of player personnel but acts as the de facto GM. Let's go back to 2021 when the Bengals had the 5th overall pick. Joe Burrow is on the mend after suffering a severe knee injury in his rookie season, and a really intense debate arises where if things go their way, the Bengals should have their pick between Penei Sewell, a really good offensive line prospect from the University of Oregon, or Jamar Chase, who's Joe Burrow's former college teammate, as Burrow and Chase dominated in 2019 as the two created this unstoppable quarterback wide receiving connection as they led LSU to the national championship just 14 months before the 2021 NFL draft. On draft night, it was simply too hard to resist to recreate that magic in Baton Rouge as the Bengals ended up selecting Jamar Chase with the 5th overall selection. Immediately, it paid huge dividends. Burrow and Chase lit up the league as the Bengals went on this historic run, beating Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs twice within a 6-week span on the way to their 3rd Super Bowl appearance in franchise history. With a chance to tie or take the lead late in Super Bowl 56, the Bengals' worst nightmare became a reality. Aaron Donald broke through the Bengals' patchwork offensive line to force an errant throw from Joe Burrow, and this ended the game. If Joe even had a second to scan the field, he would have noticed Jamar Chase streaking down the sideline wide open, which would have been the game-winning score if he was able to hit Chase in stride. And unfortunately for the Bengals, poor offensive line play has been a reoccurring theme. I can't really blame the Bengals front office, as selecting Penei Sewell, yes, would have fixed their offensive line woes, at least definitely helped with protecting Joe Burrow. But that connection that you saw between Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow in college is something rare that you just can't recreate between another random wide receiver and a talented quarterback, as sometimes that takes time to develop. But we saw that production in college, and it's the same thing translated to the NFL. But it's not like the Bengals still didn't try to find answers to protect Joe Burrow. They used draft picks. In that very same draft, they made free agent acquisitions and made significant improvements to the offensive line, especially in 2022. But for whatever reason, whether it's players underperforming to the contract that they signed them in free agency, or the draft pick underperforming compared to their draft status, or it's either a lack of development or just a player getting hurt, whatever it is, it's just continuously bad luck and poor return on the Bengals' attempts to try and improve the offensive line. Additionally, we can blame the Bengals front office for poorly managing the salary cap. When it came time to pay their superstar players like Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Trey Hendrickson, for example, they dragged their feet. With Joe Burrow, they allowed Jalen Hurts and Lamar Jackson to get paid ahead of Joe Burrow, and that upped the price by at least $20 million or so. And with T. Higgins, they were dragging their feet. They slapped the franchise tag on Higgins in consecutive years and ended up having to pay him a lot more than what they could have if they just offered him an extension early. With Jamar Chase, they again played hardball, didn't really work out, as it kind of motivated Jamar to play at this amazing level that he hasn't really tapped into in his past, and ended up leading the NFL in receiving yards, receptions, and receiving touchdowns en route to a wide receiving triple crown. With Trey Hendrickson, they had this whole issue of, is he going to get paid? Is he not going to get paid? And just before the season began, they ended up getting a deal where they restructured Trey's deal to get him more money up front, and it seems to be just essentially a one-year prove-it deal for Trey Hendrickson. We've seen the Bengals have talent at specific positions. They have a top edge rusher. They have a really good wide receiving duo. They have a stud quarterback, but the margins of the roster is where it's severely lacking, and that's really led to the Bengals being in this conundrum where they are today. They end up overpaying their players, and if you just look at the wide receivers, they could have maybe saved at least $100 million, and that money could have been used to get Trey Hendrickson a long-term deal instead of a one-year proven deal. Or you could have used that money to bring in even better offensive line talent via trade or free agency, or find a way to figure out how the hell are we going to fix this atrocious defense that we saw last year in 2024, as the Bengals offense really didn't have any problems. They were one of the best in the league, but that defense couldn't stop a nosebleed if it tried. All these moves ended up backfiring at some point for the Cincinnati Bengals. And going back to Joe Burrow, who already endured 5 sacks to start the season after 2 games, he took some really nasty hits, and one of them was from Myles Garrett, who is a behemoth of a man, and then the other significant hit pretty much ended his season prematurely. If the Bengals aren't careful, they will waste the prime of one of the best arm talents that have ever stepped foot into their facility and lose Joe Burrow to an early retirement, just like Andrew Luck with the Indianapolis Colts.